All right, we are back. We are live. Very excited about the conversation and guests we have today. We're back in the lab, policy and culture. Honestly, we just got to have a very, very thoughtful, insightful, and passionate conversation about some of the topics we're going to talk about.
Very insightful.
But as you know, policy and culture, it's always about bridging that gap, making sure that we have culturally relevant content and discussions about what's happening in today's society, even in history, about how culture has always shifted our communities. And at this point, honestly, our culture, we feel like, has shifted the world and impacted the globe when we talk about anything from music, sports, entertainment, academics, intellectuals. And that's why we're very excited about our very special guest today, who has been a leader and a trailblazer for the past 30 years in the academic world with regards to institutions and education. And we are blessed as a region to have him here on Long Island. And without further ado, we are very excited to welcome Dr. Timothy Sams, president of SUNY Old Westbury. Dr. Sams, welcome to Policy and Culture.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here. And thank you for inviting me. And I'm excited about the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Policy and culture, again, just a reference, is important to us because we like to have those deep political policy conversations and make sure that the culture is understanding in a way that we could all be informed and be educated to really make sure that we're shaping the future of our community, our region, and eventually, honestly, society in a whole. But we always like to start off with the journey, the beginning. We did some background information on you, and it was interesting to find out that you're from Syracuse.
Yes.
And also that, like us, you were an avid fan of basketball.
Yes.
You even played a little basketball, supposedly. So let's get into that. Just tell us a little bit about Syracuse and how, what that was like growing up over there.
Before I talk about the basketball, I'm sure my friends would say he wasn't that good. Right? Again, like you said, and again, thank you for this opportunity. I am from Syracuse, New York, and from the south side of Syracuse. I was about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles south of the Manley Field House, which was the original site where Syracuse University played basketball. Growing up on the south side, it's one of the most economically depressed areas of the south side, arguably west side and south side of Syracuse. I was a product of Syracuse's busing experiment in the early 70s. So I was one of those young people who got on a bus at age 5, 6, 7 through elementary school and sat on that bus for 1.5 hours and passed almost every community on the way.
Wow.
To get to a wider, arguably more middle class than where I was coming from community and to attend school. I will tell you that I had an awesome elementary experience. Even at that school, although it was part of its busing experience, it did have diversity there in terms of the teachers that I had there. I then went to a school called Blodgett Elementary School. My original school was Porter. My middle school was Blodgett Elementary School. During this entire time, I was in Boy Scouts, Weeblos, and Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and Weeblos. I say that because my experience in Boy Scouts was truly defining. I state very clearly that it was made clear to me how to be a person who seeks accomplishments, who do the work, who does the work, and Boy Scouts did a huge job in terms of just orienting me to the world, giving me a sense that there was nothing I couldn't do, which is important.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
When you're developing. I also at the same time played basketball, as you point out. Played in elementary school, played in middle school, and played the beginning of my high school. From middle school to high school, I went to a parochial school, a private Catholic school. And eventually I was unable to play basketball because I had to pay tuition in order to attend. And so I had to work in order to do that. So I had to give up basketball, which was okay. Because again, my friends would say I wasn't as good as I thought anyway. But I had no problem paying because, again, Boy Scout had taught me if that's what you want, that's what you do.
Yeah.
My grandparents who raised me taught me the same thing. I'll finish by noting my grandparents because I attribute everything about me and everything I am to them. I was raised by my grandparents, my paternal grandparents. And two things loom large in that experience. One is my father would say that his father would say, don't take a wooden nickel ever. And what he meant by that is don't let people pull the wool over your eyes. Be astute, be critical, be thoughtful.
Yeah.
Don't ever be caught sleeping, so to speak. My grandmother would teach me to always leave a person or place better than when I found it. So I tried to live that life in honor of them. And in everything I do, day in and day out, I try to put that at the forefront. Be critical, be thoughtful, but make sure you leave every person in every place better than when you discovered it.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. We're talking about the busing experiment. Was that similar to what Vice President Harris had in California? Was that around the same time or the same experiment?
I would assume so because we're about the same age.
Okay.
I would assume so. That we know that the early iteration of the busing experiment was just that, taking black kids and moving them to white. Never white to black, right, which is integration, right? It was always black to white, which we now talk in the field of black studies to be a psychologically damning experience, because you are vilifying that black community to that young black child, because you're setting up this prime example in their developmental stages where you're moving from bad to good. Right?
Yeah.
And what we know, conversely, which prevents whites from ever moving to black communities, is that they're not going to move from good to bad.
Yeah.
Right? So I would assume it's close or akin to what Vice President Harris experienced.
Right.
I will tell you that I never interpreted that way.
Okay.
And it was because I had a third grade teacher, Miss Kern, who was black. And I had a fifth grade teacher, Mr. Williams, who was black. And anything that could have happened to me throughout my K through 6 period or K through 5 rearing, they erased. They imbued in me and inspired me to be great, never let me off the hook. And I did have that experience where, you know, we call it today, you know, we characterize it, you got to be twice as good to be thought of, right? Yeah. I had that through them, and they continuously said to me, don't make excuses. I remember Miss Kern saying to me around my multiplications, to be honest with you, I remember saying to her, well, there was something wrong here. And she said, oh, no. There was nothing wrong. You didn't work hard enough. And that stuck with me. And it stuck with me throughout my life.
Yeah, it's important. Do you feel that it's very important to have representation, as you said, especially in elementary, that have teachers that look like you?
Absolutely.
And any race or whatever the student is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What we know when we study race, right? When we study racism, there's this common understanding that part of racism gets seen through the prism of the parental experience. And the reason a cop may allow a white child off for speeding or any kind of infraction is because they see that person as their child. You get the rest of the story there, right? That black child is not that cop's child when we talk about race, right? Now, that's not to say we don't have, like, Karis once say black cops, right? You know, going back to that in the early days. It's not to say that. But that is to say that we know that when a teacher steps into that classroom, they understand the story of that young black child. And they understand, more importantly, what that young black child needs in order to make it through. Yeah. And so if that person, like little Tim, doesn't have that experience whereby she stops me in my track, erases any excuse making as a way of responding to challenge throughout my life, because she knows that that's not going to play well throughout my life. And more importantly, say to him, do the work, because that is going to play well. Yeah. If I don't have that experience, she never sets me up for a fruitful life. So absolutely, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yes. And I heard you speak about, like, what you said, Boy Scouts, right?
Yes, sir.
It's crazy you said that, because me and Dan kind of met in that kind of field. His dad, his uncle, they had a program called the Royal Rangers, which was it was like a Boy Scouts thing.
Yeah.
The church was like right in my neighborhood, so all of the kids from the neighborhood, it was like Pastor Barry. We was all playing basketball there, so he made us all go to the Royal Rangers program. So programmatically, we work with a lot of kids now. How important was that? Because that impacted us still. I see the impact and the camaraderie that put to us from back then. Commander Dennis, Mango in there. Who else was in Royal Rangers with us?
Yeah,
and they had a girls group that would meet the Missionettes. They would meet at the same time. So we was kind of excited to do that, to mess with the girls and all of that. So
well,
it was
to bother the girls.
mess with the girls, bother the girls. Yeah. So it was
I always forget about that.
Yeah, it was a time, but. From a programmatically approach, we're doing a lot of work with kids, and we see that that's what's lacking. And when you said that, it kind of jumped out to me, because I feel like that structural base right there, that foundational base that you're getting at that young age, is very, very important. How did that impact you?
Well, I would say up until 12th grade, when I graduated from high school, after my grandparents, Boy Scouts was the single greatest impactful experience of my life.
Wow.
Again, it taught me about the importance of working hard to gain achievements and to keep working to gain greater achievements, right? If you think about the structure of Cub Scouts first, Weeblos, which is between Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and then Boy Scouts, each one of those experiences are discussions about who you state you want to be, who do you aspire to be as a Cub Scout, Weeblo, or a Boy Scout, right? And then the mapping out of the corresponding work to get there. And then saying, let's go get it, right? That's what our young people need, right? They need a North Star at the start. And then they need a roadmap for how you get there. And that's what Boy Scout did for me. The interesting thing is I had a highly integrated, a really mixed group of scouts and all the way through. Many of those guys are my best friends today. Just how you
How long did you do the Boy Scouts thing for?
So I did Boy Scouts until I was about 16. And the problem was I had to work and be truthful. It wasn't cool anymore. You don't get points.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I can't walk in with my scout shirt with all my badges.
At least
my
being honest though, because that's what happens a lot. Yeah.
Like, and I live in the hood, bro.
That's why we got out of there early. Royal Rangers didn't really
You don't
last
get
for us.
points, right? And then my friend said, "Where you go on Wednesday? Why were we trying to play ball? You say you can't play ball Wednesday night." I was like, "Oh," and then I think it was Vittorio, one of my best friends today. Say, you're not still going to Boy Scouts. Like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what happened. But that's why I left. 2 badges shy of being an Eagle. And I wanted to be an Eagle. I was trying to, on the low, just plow through and do it. And they caught me.
Well, that's the power of community. We always talk a lot about, sometimes, especially on Long Island, but this just probably happens in majority of all Black and brown communities. A lot of times you see this transition, because we used to mentor elementary kids.
Yes, sir.
And dope kids, man. No matter whatever the situation is at home or in the community, like they're just very like bright-eyed and innocent and fun. And then around 6th grade, and you go to see them 6th and 8th grade, it's like, whoa.
Yes.
It's a big,
Like, what just happened? Everything is like different.
Yes.
You see like they're getting a little bigger, stronger.
Yes.
The words a little more, unfortunately, at times volatile. Obviously, the girls are starting to come into play. And then in high school, depending upon their nurturing situation, their family situation, and the guidance that they have, one of the things that happens is it cooler to almost kind of like, unless you're playing sports or you're involved in school, it seems like the street starts to become more of a cooler thing.
It's more appealing.
It's more appealing.
You get the attention, you getting the girls, you getting the popularity. Like you said, if you're not playing sports, that's what's next appealing coming in these neighborhoods. So,
yeah, it's important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there was a strong element of that for me.
Yeah.
I think 2 things happened for me, however, right? Boy Scouts taught me discipline, right? Taught me how to apply time to the task, right? Again, there is really something important being done when a person understands, if I put in this much work, I get this much reward. That is worth it, right? So much of what we know happens today is people feel like they put in a lot of work for very little reward, right? Boy Scout taught me the opposite, but I also have very good grandparents.
Yeah, that matters.
Right? I had aunts and uncles who I grew up with who were like my brothers and sisters, who made sure I didn't stay in the street because they were in the street and they said, you don't get to come out here, right? I also was a nerd. I prided myself on doing the best I could academically because I wanted to make people proud of me, particularly my grandparents, if that makes sense to you. And so if the rule was you can't go out or you can't go ball, or you can't do anything until your schoolwork is properly done, right? Everything becomes secondary. And that's appropriate. That was appropriate for a person like me. It meant that in other areas I might not excel, but in academics, I had a sense of what it would take to do well.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And so I think if there's a message to be taken away from my experience, it is make sure that we're properly rewarding people and acknowledge people, acknowledging them for the work that they're doing. Because it worked for me.
That's special. Before we move into the next chapter of life, I always am very interested in what that moment, specifically culturally, right? You mentioned KRS-One. We were talking earlier about Earl the Pearl. What was at, let's say, around 18, 17 in Syracuse, what was going on in society at that time? What was Syracuse doing? What was to talk a little bit about that? What was influencing you?
All through college, I was a DJ.
Really?
So I rocked the party. So, party wasn't party until I ran through it. So that was an important piece. But it was, for the most part, all that I did, right? Because I did my schoolwork. I worked through college. But you're asking about 17 to 18. So hip hop comes on the scene and it's the music in the background at the basketball court. And as you're walking and you're dribbling, and I'm going to put it in this context, everything was hip hop, right? Everything, the music of my childhood ranged from Sugar Hill Gang to Sucker MC to KRS-One, LL, Big Daddy, and I'm going all into college. Rakim, my favorite of all time. And
Long Island.
These all that mattered, right?
Actually, I'm sorry, real quick,
because
this is something we were talking about before.
Rakim, that's the answer.
All right, because I kind of got like, I don't know. I was like surprised who had a bigger impact. Who would you take, Rakim or KRS-One?
Oh,
exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
I think it depends on who you ask, right?
This is why I told him you can't just ask anybody that question.
Yeah.
I felt like that was clear cut.
Yeah.
That's not clear cut at all. They very they iconic
No, I don't
figures.
think it's clear cut.
No?
I think they complemented one another. You'll find that I'm that person that don't like putting black people against one another, right?
Right.
I'm interested in the way in which they play off one another. And we're clear in the same way that we would not have had a Malcolm if we didn't have a Martin, right? We would not have had a Garvey if we didn't have a Du Bois, right? I don't know. Rakim and Karis were both necessary at the same time. They would not. I could not have imagined those two going against one another like beefing, right? Because they were the same kind of work.
Yeah.
However, KRS-One has some beats, man. He has some beats that just like bang and sit there. And Rakim just smooth you out. Right?
Criminal Minded, man. You could go back to that episode where I said it, man. That Criminal Minded.
Yeah.
Then he mix it a little bit with the reggae in there.
Yeah.
Like he really he shut the whole Queensbridge down. Like he put it like that was the Ja Rule before Ja Rule got Ja Rule.
That's fair. But I would also add Chuck D.
Facts.
Right? I mean, for me, the three of them, if there's a tripartite, I put them in there as well. Because Chuck D gave us our anthem to our childhood.
Fight the Power.
Mm-hmm.
Long
Island
that was
the
well
anthem.
away from Roosevelt Freeport, right?
And so,
Chuck D from Long Island too.
Yeah. Long Island got some heavy hitters.
Yeah, but Rakim, his lyricism
Was
is just
Syracuse
like,
got any heavy hitters?
So we had, I'm going to say from the DJ standpoint, yes.
Okay.
We had some really good DJs. And then there was one group that I recall during my period, KOC, Cooling Out Crew. My friend was a member of them. Chris Harris, rest in peace, was a member of KOC. They, I believe, had 2 albums out. I don't think it ever got national attention, but they were really good. But they were homegrown and they were ours. Yes.
Was Syracuse where Rick James and Eddie Murphy recorded the party all the time?
I thought that was Buffalo.
Buffalo.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was Buffalo.
And Upstate got like a real emergence with the hip hop scene right now. Like they got a real presence on the like underground kind of gangster rap. Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse. They got some real like prominent guys coming up from there.
And I'm embarrassed that I'm drawing a blank because one of the top persons in hip hop, white guy, is from Syracuse.
Right now?
Yes, yeah. He's from Syracuse. He's from the West Side. You would think about him tatted up on the face.
Not the dude that was with LBL.
No, he's from Boston. He's from Boston.
No. You got to go to top number 1.
Really?
Yes. He's
Is he
from
a big dude?
No. Like you're not getting him because you can't imagine that he's from Syracuse.
Okay.
Right? That's the only
Not
reason.
Post Malone, right?
Yes, sir.
Really?
He's from West Side.
Post Malone from Saturday.
He's
That's your
from
boys, man, too.
Yeah. I didn't know that. Wow. That's interesting. So, kind of like the fast forward, I know you went to post-grad University of Albany, right?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you go for undergrad?
I went to Union College. Which is about 20 minutes away from
So you stayed local?
U Albany, yeah. The link between the two began during my undergraduate experience. My school didn't have Black Studies courses. I was a history sociology major after I began pre-med. I went to school because I was interested in either being a pediatrician or a gynecologist.
Oh.
That didn't work out. It was Orgal, right? The weed out course. It weeded me out. Then I went to history sociology. But in my program, we didn't have any Black Studies courses. We have what was called the Mohawk Consortium that allowed a student to take courses on any campus. And so I took 8 courses in my undergrad experience over at UAlbany. So I actually majored in Black Studies in part by virtue of that. And then for graduate school, I went to, for my master's, I went to UAlbany to get my master's.
And then you got your doctorate from Temple,
From
right?
Temple, yes, sir.
There's a lot of history over there, too.
Philadelphia, right?
Yes.
Who was the big coach?
Eddie what is it? Cheney.
Cheney.
Was he there?
He was there when I was there.
He was coaching there?
He was there.
Okay.
The tail end, though.
Got
It
it.
was a tail end.
So you spoke a little bit about, even at Union College, local in Albany, Black Studies. And before the conversation today, we've been talking about a little bit, a very passionate conversation about Pan-Africanism.
Yes,
and when we were reading your bio and just doing some research on you, I think that stood out because there's so much rooted history in Pan-Africanism. Even right now, I would probably say like one of the prominent figures, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but that's still kind of pushing it on a social platform would be Dr. Umar Johnson.
Oh, yes, sir.
Who's actually coming out to Wyandanch December 5th to Wyandanch Library. But can you just talk a little bit like what was that early interest? Like what pulled you towards Pan-Africanism? And also for those that are listening that may not fully understand it, it may just have kind of like a broader scope of what it is. Can you just break that down a little bit?
Yeah. When I graduated from high school, I had gone to a school where we had about 79 Black students in total. We had had a fight between the blacks and white, and that fight led me to wonder what role I was expected to play in addressing the challenges that Black people face, right, long term, right? Really believing and really being committed to that work and having that in part drive my going to college. When I talk about peds, wanting to be a pediatric or a gynecologist, it really was wrapped around the notion that health was a central part of our vitality. And that if you don't start with the children or if you don't protect the women that Malcolm had taught us to do, right? If you don't do that, then you have no community. right? And so while it was at one level about the love of medicine and to use it to keep people healthy and alive, it was also part of my commitment to doing the best I can to, again, address the challenges that Black people face. When I pulled out of that, I leaned further into Black studies. And with that still in the back of my mind, what am I called to do? What am I supposed to do in terms of leaving the world better for Black people and everyone? Then when I found it, answering my grandmother's challenge to me in life, right? Pan-Africanism gave me the answer. It was part of a couple of pieces. I'm also an Afrocentric scholar, or what we call an Africologist, right? One doesn't necessitate the other, just for clarification's sake, but they're truly complementary, truly complementary. Africology is an answer to how intellectually we address the plight of Black Americans. Pan-Africanism is the ideology. I call it an ideology, and that's a debated, contested notion, but is an ideology that addresses Africans worldwide. And so I believe...
Not to cut you off,
yes.
Why would they debate that, though? Why would that?
The use of ideology as a term.
Okay.
Just specifically that, ideology.
Okay. Yeah.
As what I call a totalizing idea, that it explains what people should do who sits upon it in almost every aspect of its lives. It shapes culture, it dictates politics, it dictates education, dictates sports, that kind of thing. And so some people would say Pan-Africanism is not that comprehensive. And I would say if it's going to liberate African people, it must be. It doesn't, I don't believe that it's incapable of being that comprehensive, right? In the same way that we think about democracy, or we think about capitalism, or we think about socialism, right? Or we think about communism. When you're in a democratic society, you understand how to operate, right? That's ideological, right? Capitalism, we understand how to, that's ideological. Same thing in a socialist community. I believe Pan-Africanism has to be that for African people, otherwise we'll never be free. Because as soon as you are up under somebody else's ideology, you're up under somebody else's ideology.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So we can be ardent capitalists as Black people and think that we're fighting for African freedom. As though capitalism, or there's a variance of capitalism that could ever be in support of African freedom. Capitalism wasn't created by us, and definitely wasn't created for us, and we became its pawn in our initial contacts, right?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so Pan-Africanism causes us to ask those questions. And so getting back to the answer to your question, it was during undergrad where being introduced to Pan-Africanism, coupled with at the same time Afrocentricity, those two things made sense for me.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And, you know, again, as we were talking earlier, a lot of times when you talk about Pan-Africanism, the figure that stands out, and Drew could talk a lot more about this, though, but it's quite frankly Marcus Garvey.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's good to kind of dive into this conversation a bit because, again, it's policy and culture.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things that you had mentioned is absolutely Marcus Garvey was a huge figure, especially when you talk about the power of the grassroots. But then you also got to compliment and highlight W.E.B. Du Bois and also Blyden and a lot of other figures. So can you just talk a little bit about that balance?
I think that's probably what I wanted to ask of why Marcus Garvey is so relevant to us. Like, why? Like, you know what I'm saying? Why
Because he spoke directly to us, right? None of the people sitting in the academy did that.
So
right?
this being him being on like the streets in Harlem, being a Jamaican.
That's exactly.
Okay,
There's really
got you.
no other greater reason than that. He spoke the language. He spoke directly to the needs, right? He was there, right? Whereas other folks who were principals in the Pan-Africanist movement were seated in the academy, nestled up in the academy, making their claim an important claim. Because if you think about how I try to suggest Pan-Africanists to be, that's a lot of intellectual work. Think about what it takes intellectually to undo the way in which capitalism has raveled itself around our bodies and our minds as Black people. Yeah. Intellectually, you have to commit your entire life. to figuring out how do I get black people to not buy into that because they buy into their own devastation, right? So somebody has a responsibility in a movement, right? If the movement seeks to liberate all the people, somebody got to sit in that space for decades, right? There were those who did that. But someone also has to be real and be frank, be right now, be at the roots, having that same discourse, maybe doing some trial and error, not going to be perfect, but going to be committed, right? Marcus Garvey was that person. And he deserves to be held, in a lofty manner because he did the work.
Yeah. And again, just timeline. I don't know why I'm not putting this together correctly. He was around the same time. This was 60s, right? 50s and 60s?
Oh, or a little earlier.
A little earlier.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes,
so he wasn't necessarily around the same time of Malcolm and Martin. It was a little earlier.
So he came prior to the two.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was he born in Harlem?
He's Jamaican.
He's Jamaican.
He's
He was born in
yes.
St. Anne's, Jamaica.
Yeah.
St. Anne's, Jamaica. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about just a little bit? You mentioned Blyden earlier and his role in this in Pan-Africanism.
Can I ask him one?
Go ahead, absolutely.
Yeah. He created something called, I remember it was like the UNIA, right?
Yes,
The
United
UNIA.
Negro Improvement Association.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What was the
Yeah.
like what was the situation with that and the whole like the pens this trade thing that he was trying to do with the shit? Like,
So I'll be very honest. From a Pan-Africanist standpoint, the easiest thing African people can do to liberate themselves is to go back to Africa. The hardest thing for African people to do is to go back to Africa. Right? So different goals, right? Different, not necessarily different goals, but different impetus. Garvey is correct. Freedom for African people is based on the condition of the continent of Africa. Absolutely. That's Pan-Africanism, right? He's absolutely correct. Forget all of this trying to negotiate and fix whatever you got here in the Americas, right? Go back there and fix your continent and then you'll be forever free, right? Very sensible, but a hard message to deliver to people who have wrapped up themselves here for generations, right? That's number one. UNIA's role was to do that, to make the compelling case and to provide the vehicle for African people to get back to the continent. There's a guy passed away a couple decades ago who I actually had a personal relationship with during the Black Power movement, and when he wrote the book with Greer called Black Power, Stokely Carmichael, right? Later became Kwame Ture. He took Sekou Toure and Kwame Nkrumah's name. That's how he changed his name. He used to say, and he's absolutely right, the only way we are free is through organization. There's no other way. There's no set of scattered activities that African people domestically on the continent or anywhere else can engage in that will lead to their freedom. It takes focus, being organized in order to free us. Garvey knew that well over half a century ago, that what was required to free African people was organization.
Yeah.
Same spirit, same understanding that Du Bois had when he created NAACP as part of that group, Niagara Movement's activity, right? Same thing. But Garvey was very good at organizing the folks at the roots, right? And he did it through an important African ritual of pageantry, right? You got what I'm saying,
when you
right?
say pageantry, what you mean?
So he had the regalia, he had the parade, he had the activities that bring us together, right? Carnival, right? He understood that if you're going to deliver the message, you got to get them there, and you got to get them of a certain mood, right? In order to take the message. He was brilliant in that regard.
Yeah. No, I love it. Fast forward, so we know you got your doctorate at Temple. Then I thought it was interesting. When did you end up becoming a professor? Was it Morehouse? Talk a little bit about
No.
What's your journey to Morehouse?
It's interesting. So my doctorate is in Africology.
Okay.
And the last time I taught was in 90, 5.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's the last time I taught. I did teach courses that would take students, if you will, to West Africa, every other year during my work. But in the academy, I pursued my career in student affairs. And again, it had everything to do with my answering the question, what can I do to leave a person better than when I found them, right? I had a very fractured and tumultuous undergrad experience. And I reflected upon that and said that I don't ever want anybody else to go through what I went through. So I chose the path that I thought would enable me to do that the best, and that being student affairs, realizing or recognizing that when you're in student affairs, you have more time with the student than faculty do. Not necessarily influence, because depending on the topic, I can give you material from that which faculty have given me, but also in terms of me as a person, give you material about something folks in student affairs are given. And so I chose student affairs because I really thought about the development of students during the undergrad experience, and I wanted to create programs that took into consideration their development and put them in a better place so they can make better plays in their life and the lives of their communities they come from. And certainly, I'm obliged to orient them toward equitable and justice behavior, right? That kind of thing. So doing that. So that's been my career from the beginning at a school called College of St. Rose in Albany, New York, all the way to Morehouse, RPI, NYU, Swarthmore Williams College, and Prairie View out in Houston. Yeah. Every one of those stops, while I was ascending in my career, what I tried to do is add some complexity to my primary project, which is to figure out how, in support of students who are going to go off and be great to do things, they're also well-heeled people, right? Equity-minded and justice-oriented.
Yeah. Learning more about you, it's almost like destiny that you ended up at SUNY Old Westbury. Why I say that is because your predecessor was huge impact himself.
Yes, sir.
And I remember, I'll be honest, rest in peace, Reverend Calvin Obuz, who was the former president of SUNY Old Westbury and also the lead pastor of the very historical Abyssinian Church. Sir. I remember a couple of times I would see him speak, and my goodness, I mean, we're talking about monumental people right now. He's right up there with them. Like it was just easy. He would hit you, head, shoulder, like you just, oh my goodness.
He can work through you.
Oh my goodness. And I remember when he, retired, and then eventually passed away. I was thinking, man, who can take this mantle? Of SUNY Old Westbury, and the work he did, and the increase of student enrollment, and just the culture. It was just a very rich culture. And sitting here with you now and learning more about you in the past couple of weeks as we've been doing your research, it's just not only are we so grateful to have you here on Long Island, but it just makes so much sense.
Wow. And it's a testimony to the student athletes. We run Boulder Mac Park Summer League, so a lot of the student athletes go through there from Farmingdale, SUNY Old Westbury. And I always said from the Westbury community that it was just a different vibe there. But you could see the vibe with the student athletes that play in the MAC from SUNY Old Westbury. They coming from a structured situation. It's not much of a hassle, very respectful. So that's a testimony to that as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Was SUNY Old Westbury, as you said, like you mentioned, as you're ascending into different roles in your career, was that something that was interesting to you? Like just the history of it? Did it catch your eye? How did that work out when you ended up?
Interesting. I wasn't aware of SUNY Old Westbury.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Unfortunately, during my undergraduate experience, unbeknownst to me, many of my peers were traveling down to Old Westbury to party. Right? I wasn't one of them. I didn't go as far. I didn't go farther than Vassar. Okay. Vassar, right? What happened was, in the latter part of my career in my third vice presidency, a number of people were saying, you got to get you a campus. You got to be a president. And I was okay because I was doing what I felt like I was called to do. It was a couple of things. My mother-in-law wanted me to be a president, right? And remember,
Shout out to the mother-in-law.
that's right. You got to remember, I'm Afrocentric.
Yeah.
So that means I believe in the power of the ancestors, right? I can't have her haunting me because I disappointed her. That's one thing, right? Then a lot of my colleagues, and so finally one of my colleagues who had actually been a chancellor here, not the chancellor, but one of the chancellors in the SUNY system, called me and said, I have your campus. Fast forward, he nominated me, they called me. I read about it, I was like, where did this place come from? Because I was clear I could only be president of a certain kind of campus, right? And if anything, that would have been a historically black college or university, right? That's what I was, in my latter part of my career, groomed for.
That's the vibes that SUNY Old Westbury gives. It's like a historical black college right now.
Sir.
Yeah, it's fraternities over there now, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. It still does. But we are, an HSI, our largest population are Hispanic student population, about 33%, about 24% black, about 26% white. The rest, are Asian. So wildly diverse, wonderfully diverse. Yeah. And you have an experience there that you are pressed to find in other places. But it wasn't that I always wanted to be a president. I would take a presidency if it felt right.
Yeah.
I was somewhat convinced that there were few places I could be a president of. But when this opportunity came and I looked at it, I said, whoa, that's it. That's it. It was very obvious. And when people ask me, why did I do it? And my answer is alignment. I think that when you make a move of that magnitude and you're willing to deal with the challenges that come with being a president, you got to be aligned.
Yeah.
Because boy, it gets tough in there.
Yeah. And as president, can you talk a little bit about that role? Is it similar to being the CEO of a Fortune 500? How many employees or faculty are you managing? How many students are you managing? Just talk a little bit about the role of a president of a university.
I would liken
college.
it more to a mayor.
A mayor?
Yeah,
okay.
A mayor, because you think about, you have an entire city called your campus. I have 500 employees. I have 4,700 students. And you're trying to get along and make sure that ultimately excellence prevails in that environment.
Yeah.
From a CEO standpoint, absolutely. Our titles in the SUNY system is we're president and COO. So I think that gets at your question.
Got it.
That we understand that we have a strong operational responsibility.
Yeah.
And a good deal of our work is done in that vein. As a president, it's to be very clear, I'm an educator. I am an educator through and through. My responsibility is to make sure that we provide the greatest educational product that we can for our students. Yeah. Make sure that we're providing the greatest transformation and leaning into their dreams and empowering that. That's my primary role.
You know, we were talking about the Reverend Doctor. Reverend Doctor was an incredible presence. Calvin O. Butts. Was it the third? Was he a third?
He was a third, yes.
Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts the third.
And there's a fourth.
There is a fourth.
Yes.
I talk about lineage.
I think the fourth is now at Morehouse.
Really?
Yes.
Again, so it's destiny.
Yeah.
It's destiny. Right. And again, his impact at SUNY Old Westbury as former president. Can you talk a little bit about his influence and impact even on your life?
Yes. Yeah, I can do that. First, I say to everybody, I am not at Old Westbury to fill his shoes. I think that'd be foolish, right? Would you walk into any moment thinking you could immediately fill Dr. King's shoes? Right? Yeah. Like we used to say back in the day, don't play yourself, right? So I don't do that. I walk into every moment of my life trying to do the best I can, right? And that's what I say to folks. I'm going to do the best I can as the president at SUNY Old Westbury while being very cognizant of who I'm succeeding as president. I think one of the things that I am also very well aware about Dr. Butts in particular is, as a man of Morehouse, which is a person who's been at Morehouse but not a student, I would be a man of Morehouse. I was very aware of Dr. Butts from that angle. That fine tradition that we hew out of our young graduates that can only create a Morehouse man. He's one of the quintessentials. He's in that pantheon. And you got to think about the folks who are in that pantheon. The folks who, particularly for African America, who have been trained by Morehouse, the creed of Morehouse, the beliefs of Morehouse, well-dressed, well-spoken, well-read, well-traveled men who are expected to be principled and to guide African Americans, right? He's of that tradition,
Absolutely.
that king tradition, right? I'm not going to ever walk up and think that I can do that. But when people say, what does he mean for you? I see what made him from a Morehouse lens, right? I was part of doing that at Morehouse for 4.5 years while I was there as a vice president. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, right?
Yeah.
To whom much is given, much is required. He was given that stellar Morehouse education. He brought that back home up to New York, right? And he played it about as beautifully as any person had ever done, right? Only he could have done what he had done, right? A stalwart, cultural mecca in the form of Abyssinia, right? And then to come to our university and to orchestrate a turnaround scenario that we're proud of. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just the last thing I would say about his presence was I was blessed to be around him a few times, actually. And, you know, sometimes you might try to go off the cuff. I don't want to say BS, but like just like try to make it seem like you know what's going on. You can't even try.
You can't do that. Yeah. He's not built that way.
You can't even try.
He's not built that way.
He was too sharp.
Yeah, he was.
And I would even go as far, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned it, so I'm just going to follow up a little bit.
Yes, sir.
If there was a similar presence, and you know me, Drew, so I'm not just saying this.
Yeah.
Because you know how I feel about a lot of different situations. I almost get the feeling like if back in the day you had an opportunity to be around Dr. King,
Yes.
Malcolm, it would have been, he gave a little bit of what that might have been like. His presence, like, my gosh, this guy is sharp.
Yes. I think that's fair.
And like you said, he played the game, and it wasn't like he played the game. He was a composer of moment.
Yeah.
Like his ability to speak, and it wasn't just I'm speaking eloquently for the moment to make a show. It was like, oh, he embodies this.
Yeah.
It was a very unique thing.
I think that's very fair. I was trained by those who were part of Dr. King's team in crafting nonviolence. I used to work for the King Institute for Nonviolence here in New York State. And so I had the honor of working for the folks who put together the principles, who put together the steps to Kingian Nonviolence. And I was part of a charge to educate 15% of New York State people in Kingian Nonviolence as a principle, as a driving principle. The first Cuomo wanted every person in New York, well, 15% of the population, to understand nonviolence as a mechanism for reducing violence, but creating a beloved community across the state. Wonderful goal from a governor, right? So when I look at those folks, and then I look at the folks that I've been privileged to sit next to as part of senior level training, all of the top people in the civil rights movement shy of Dr. King, right? From Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Diane Nash, Dolores, everybody, Coretta Scott King, I can keep naming, right? Jesse, all of these folks. Dr. Butts was squarely consistent with the magnitude of those folks, right? I mean, he was so absolutely brilliant in the way that those folks are, convicted in the way that those folks are, committed to his people in the way that those folks are, right? But remember, I just want to give you this recall. Dr. Butts made a lot of people mad.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The one that started for me was when he rode that bulldozer over those CDs. You don't remember that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's when he made the whole hip hop community mad, where he basically said, "You will not call our women bees." And he took a bulldozer and rolled over the CDs.
I've seen that. I've seen that before.
Right? That is so important for a man of conscience.
And that's a testimony
to us.
That's a testimony to him of being ahead of his time.
That's right.
I know
Yes,
exactly
sir.
what you're
Yes,
talking
sir.
about. And it's like now you even starting to hear hip hop artists say like, "Yo, this drill music is just it's getting out of control. We can't do this. We got to change the narrative." I wasn't really too familiar with Dr. Bus. I heard Dan and his, family speak very highly of him. But just that right there is a testimony to that. And that was how long ago was that when he did that with the bulldozer?
That's when I was in college. So that would have been late 80s.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, way ahead of his time.
Yeah, he
way
was.
ahead of the times.
Yeah, the times, right.
Yeah.
But he occupied a certain role, and that was as the senior pastor of one of our most important churches in the country. Right? That kind of responsibility gonna keep you straight anyway, right? Yeah.
Another question, right? So, do you think it could have been a dialogue instead of rolling over with the CDs?
He tried.
Oh, he tried.
Yeah, he was pushing the dialogue. And what we know in nonviolence is that when the dialogue isn't working, you kind of make it more responsible by direct action. So what we look at is the direct action. What we miss is all the conversation around that, right? That's nonviolence at its finest. You dramatize, right, the issue. Everybody remembers that. No one remembers the conversation, but what we walked away with is a heightened sense that music as a transmitter of culture, right, has an obligation to project its people in the best ways possible. And calling women bees and calling black folks ends and everything else is not how you project your people in the best. No other people's music in a highly active way degrades its people in the way that hip hop does for us. Thank God for the blues. Thank God for R&B, because it heals us from our own self-attack, right? If we didn't have that, boy, whoa.
Yeah.
I think it gotta be almost classified too, because it's like maturity. Right
yes,
now
it
you
is.
got the
well said.
The drill rappers.
Said, yeah.
That's completely out of control.
Yeah.
We could look at somebody as like Jay-Z, who's evolved into a businessman, an entrepreneur. He's a married man now. He's mindful of what he says. Just his whole, I feel like, era is kind of evolved. So that's why I feel like the bridge, like we say, bridging the gap.
Yeah.
Even when we speak about Marcus Garvey, he was connected to the grassroots, but he wasn't connected into the, what was you said, the academies, right?
The academy.
He wasn't connected to the academies, and I just think that was years ago, and this is still happening. Like, how do we bridge this gap? How do we get the grassroots connected with these academies? How do we make these academies comfortable with coming to the grassroots? How can we get the grassroots equipped to get to the academies?
Yeah. Not only are you preaching, right, telling the truth, but you're posing probably one of the most outstanding questions that even in my discipline in Black Studies persists as a challenge. I remember when I was coming into Black Studies, my mentor at the time was Vivian Verdell Gordon at SUNY Albany. She was my queen mother, right? And many students' queen mothers. One of the things she said to me, and I remember speaking in some venue or some place or in some way, it could have just been class. And she said, "Tim, if the people don't understand what you say, it doesn't matter." She said, "Your obligation is to make it plain, make it accessible," right? And I always walked away from that moment obsessing over how do I take, again, these very complex ideas and make them plain and accessible to my people. Because if I don't, then I'm not doing the work, right? And I think it is foolish and maybe even fanciful to think that you can liberate a segment of Black America and we'll all be free. Yeah. Like if I can just skim off the top half, whoever that top half is, if I can free them, we gonna all, that ain't how that boat rises. Yeah. It has never worked. It's never worked in our history, right? We all have to get there together, period. So I think your question is spot on, and it is the obligation of that intellectual to not fall prey to the proclivities of capitalism, of elitism, and to think that because they can wax poetically and thereby convince major segments of our community that they can't get the ideas and be as bright and whatever. I don't know what the value of that is in the grand scheme of things, except for securing some of the rewards of the man, so to speak, right? Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah.
And I think to kind of loop back into the capitalism part of it, because this is something that we do miss a lot with music. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I do think on topic, what has happened is hip-hop has become incredibly lucrative.
Yes, sir.
And so when we talk about, let's just say, African-American capitalism, it's one of the primary sources to wealth. And you can see how so many people gravitate from poverty into wealth because of their ability to latch on to their skill set, their ability to speak, which is also a direct connection from even post-slavery, where a lot of individuals that were in slavery, one of their pathways to freedom was being able to eloquently speak.
Yes, sir.
Become
Yes, sir.
pastors.
Always, yes, sir.
Go through the entire South up to the North
point.
and just preaching and being able to stand on that box and communicate faith. So it's something that is continuing to translate. And then obviously with hip hop, it comes from the pain of the 70s and 80s. It comes from the pain of, I would say, kind of like the post-60s movement, civil rights, right into the crack era. But when you take into capitalism, it's incredibly hard to now separate that.
Yeah.
Where there is an opportunity to make millions doing this type of music, to your point, and this is what me and Drew always talk about, that no other culture has such a monetary ability to almost destroy itself, but make so much money
in the process.
But I just feel like that's just from a capitalism approach. I feel like if they looked at it from like a black nationalist situation, I think that it would be better, because at the end of the day, like, I know everybody look at Dame Dash like he crazy, but Leo Cohen's, the whatever Rifkin guys, these is the guys that's really making the boatloads of money. You getting millions, but at the end of the day, you getting crumbs, and it's really like killing your people. I feel like if we had a foundational base of older gentlemen that kind of understood the game, and I'm like, yo, nah, I'm not really investing into this poison right here. I'm not gonna give you millions of dollars because I know this is gonna be a domino effect of really killing our community. You got to look at the figures now. So, Jay-Z said Muhammad Ali inspired him. You feel me? So that's just kind of like a positive energy. You got to think of what might have inspired somebody like a Little Durk. Look at his situation right now. You feel me? They don't really got no foundational base to where it's like, yo, this is how we gonna move through the hip hop industry. And there's been too many murders and stuff already, going back from Biggie Smalls, going back to Tupac now, Young Thug just going through the situation he going through, Little Durk caught up. I just feel like somebody needs to be held accountable inside the culture, to where it's just like, we just gonna continue just to let us just run rapid and run wild, when we gonna take an approach and just control what's ours. You feel me? And just not say we just gonna take this little bit of money, because that's always the case, whether it's hip hop, whether it's a black movement, whether it's anything regarding to us. It ultimately comes down to somebody cutting themselves short or cutting their culture short for financial
for
gain.
the money. Yeah. And I would even say, to take it as far as that was the initial problem with Africa, in a way of what happened. And this is very deep, so we don't even got to go that crazy into it. But where there was an opportunity to rise above other tribes in Africa, when European powers started to come into Africa, and you could see that there was this, let me get ahead of, the Zulu tribe, or let me get ahead of Senegal, or let me get ahead of Ghana. And you see how it was always a monetary, almost betrayal to do that. And then that's kind of like what's still holding us back from being able to really unite, is still the bag. It's still monetary. It's still money. And one of the biggest drivers of how we define culture at this point is almost entertainment and how that entertainment dictates our culture and our society. Not sure if you want to jump into that, but for the sake,
I could jump into that.
I would love to hear your thoughts.
I one angle of thought about what you shared is, I start with the statement, I don't know what African American capitalism is. I know what capitalism is, and I know people participate in capitalism, right? And that capitalism, again, going back to as an ideology, is a beast that feeds itself. It's only one master. The notion that it could feed other masters, I don't know about, right? That's one point of it, right? That if we became greater and better capitalists, I don't know how much closer that would bring us to freedom. It certainly would improve the lot of certain people's lives. But I believe ardently that freedom for African people is a statement about the condition of Africa, a condition that everybody but us have always been crystal clear about. Everybody wants the wealth of the continent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But us, it seems.
That's wild.
Right? And it has always been the case. But that we don't have a collective awareness of what we have. And I'm not just talking about the mineral resources. I'm talking about the cultural resources that spring forth out of it, what Africa has given to its people and to the world, right? So that's the first thing I'd say. What I also, and what I'm hearing from you, think about is the way in which our experience feels desperate to us as just a constant way of life. And even the crumbs you may refer to actually are lifesavers, right, for us, right? In the sense that someone has given us, has thrown out the life jacket to us that could really take us out of that desperation into a better scenario. And it's so desperate that I would engage in almost any means necessary to put that life jacket on, right? I can't blame that person. That person is not creating those desperate conditions. That person has not contrived one ghetto, did not create one plantation, did not manufacture any crack or any other forms of cocaine in its original, right? That person doesn't control the economic flow of resources, does not manage the education, right? The only thing we get to control, and Umar Johnson talks very wonderfully about this, the only thing we get to control is religion that has been given to us. So do we really control that, right? We don't have one thing that we control. Right? So I can't blame that person. And I can't blame that person for putting on the life jacket when it's thrown to him or her. And then told, this is how you wear that life jacket. You denigrate your people. You call your mama out of her name. You trample on the soil of your ancestors. And I'm going to give you, as you point out, those crumbs.
Yeah.
Right? Right? And then we hold those people up. And we somehow learn how to live this dramatically dichotomous experience that has us knowing that this person has called his mama out of it, one of the most insacred acts in our culture, right? Like we get into a fight, you call my mama a B. You got what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So we hold that person up knowing this person is doing something that goes against the cultural truisms of our community. Right? That does psychologically something to us when we force ourselves not to call into question what we innately know is wrong.
Yeah.
And we say, oh, this is a great person. Oh, but that person doesn't call. So, I mean, there's a lot in what you say, but that's just a couple of things that emerge as thoughts there. Yeah.
And it goes back into the principles, values, the integrity of our culture, and how we want that to be realigned moving forward. Yeah. Can you just talk a little bit in your role at SUNY Old Westbury? There's a lot of workforce development initiatives. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question. Workforce development is an interesting, if you will, proposition for a school like a SUNY Old Westbury. We were founded in '65 to provide access to excellent liberal arts education and to graduate folks who knew how to, under the banner of social justice, advance society and respond to the needs of their community. Right? Those two things. In that way, we as an institution were founded in a manner that's consistent with all of higher education, and that is responding to the obligation to address America's emergent needs. Because in the 60s, we were dealing with bringing people into the academy that previously were not allowed, and we were dealing with the social tumult, right? That is to say, the academy has an obligation to respond to emergent American needs, right? We, as presidents, are well aware of that. So workforce development comes as part of that response, right? We have, post-COVID, had a major diminution in the number of employed Americans. We lost 1 million people. We lost hundreds of thousands of workers, right, during COVID. While at the same time, we had some emergent sectors, particularly in technology, right, now called infrastructure, right? That is our response to the global competitive environment that we find ourselves in. Again, post-COVID, other societies kept churning while we were really mired in COVID and trying to respond to that. And when I say churning in the tech sectors, right? We saw a major downtick in literacy rates against our global competitors in terms of reading, in terms of mathematics, and in terms of technology, right? And we went like this because they somehow kept moving and we either stagnated or actually went down. So all of these things set up a condition for workforce development. The challenge for a liberal arts, public liberal arts university like Old Westbury is that we don't train assembly workers, we train assemblymen and women, right? We don't put people on the line to work. That's a trade school. That's a BOCES in New York State, we're all familiar with. That's a community college. We train leaders, we train researchers, we train thinkers. That's what we do, right? And we do it at a very high level. So the challenge for us is, for our population, is how do we construct a workforce development effort that complements that makes them even more competitive, make them more agile, smarter, brighter, right? Being able to have a range of possibilities. But if you think about it, if we address administrative elements of workforce development in terms of upskilling, making them better with the use of technology in their fields, et cetera, that's going to make them better leaders throughout the organizations. Our graduates don't go to assembly lines. So much of the workforce development is really about that workforce, that element of the workforce. Our graduates go to the boardrooms.
Got it.
Right. And so our goal is to provide a workforce development experience that actually expedites that pathway.
Got it.
One other thing I would say I'm worried about, Gen Z, right, doesn't strike me as being highly receptive to workforce development efforts, right? Keep in mind, we deal with an average age student of about 23 years of age, right? We don't deal with 28, 30, 40, right? Who are trying to reskill, which is a different dynamic.
Yeah.
We deal with students who are like, okay, where do I want to land? It's a tough sell to say, I'm going to put you on an assembly line, right? Yeah, I'll do that for 2 years till I get bored. That's Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
I get bored, then what I'm going to do? So we think our obligation is to give them all the skills that we can, but give them an overall career pathway that keeps them viable but in leadership positions.
Understood.
I hope that helps.
That's actually an incredible breakdown.
Yeah,
One of the
absolutely.
best that I've heard. We do a lot of workforce development work with our Minority Millennials program. And we actually see a very similar thing. And not to break it down so simple, but there is to us almost like this split in the middle of who we're targeting. It's the individuals. We focus usually around 16 to 38.
Yes, sir.
And that 16 to 24, honestly, especially the 16 to 18 is, are you going to more local community skills and trade, or are you going to higher education?
Right.
And there is a stark difference between the person, none of which is better than the other. It's just we try to prepare them for what is best aligned for who they are.
That's right.
Because you could excel greatly.
That's right.
Just as long as you know that you want to go into skills trade, even if it's that assembly line, at assembly line you can end up being someone that's in general management, even a vocal representative of that group, potentially of that union, and is better off if that person does that rather than spending or investing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then they end up going back to work there anyway because that's not what their makeup was.
Right.
That's not what they were interested in.
Well, thank you for saying that. Let me start by saying it is possible that our communities get the least amount of career training, preparation, right, of their counterparts, right? That we're not having conversations that really are about where do you see yourself in 15, 20 years?
Yeah.
Right? The simple, real easy question to ask. Forcing them to answer that question, and then let's talk about how you get there. Simple question. We don't do that enough, first of all. The second thing is I'm taken back to yesterday where I told a group of educators, I want us to be careful and try to strike a healthy balance around this workforce development piece. As I said to them, my concern is when you talk about Black and brown people, both communities have always thought that the number one social equalizer was education. Have always. We've always understood that, right? The greatest social equalizer, the greatest factor that will erase racism for Black folks, we grew up, is in education. What they say, because they'll never take it away from you. And you can always make your life work with it, right? And so now we may be being duped into this. You don't need higher education, just get this certification. You don't do that. No group of people take their best and brightest segment of their population and give them a screwdriver. Nobody does that. I just want us to be careful. You get what I'm saying there? Yeah. And I hope I'm not trying to shun workforce development because it's a very viable option for so many. Yeah. But it is not the panacea.
Oh, absolutely.
For addressing the conditions of Black and brown people. Yeah. I came up when it was the internet.
Yeah.
Right? And we were told the rising tide of the internet was going to lift all social boats. Everybody was going to be able to benefit. That never happened. Because some people maybe didn't even have boats.
Yeah.
That never happened. So now we got the infrastructure bill, right? Government plowed trillions of dollars into this. We need an agenda for these communities who got bypassed decades ago and who are poised to be bypassed yet again because that infrastructure bill was not meant for them. Mm-hmm. It's our job to figure out how we make it fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I'm not sure if Drew, you wanted to.
I'm thankful for the conversation.
It
was very
Thank you.
Insightful. I was introduced to a lot of things that I wasn't even privy to that I thought I knew. So I'm thankful for the conversation.
Yeah. I just want to express my appreciation for your leaning into Dr. Butts. Right? I think it's important for us to really constantly work to put him in his proper context.
Absolutely.
And, he was immense.
Yeah. Like I said, I've really seen, I have a high regard for my pops, rest in peace. But in presence like that, there's something different. Mm-hmm. And, there's something different. And we were blessed to have him on the island and in New York for a lot of the work. So absolutely. So we usually do this thing where we kind of talk about who would you choose, but out of respect for what you mentioned, I think that is a high regard. Like, you don't want to put one Black person against another Black person. I'd rather ask you a question.
Yes.
What would you say to little Tim in Cub Scouts now as a president of SUNY Old Westbury? Because you seem like at a very young age you understood accomplishments and what it took to reach that accomplishment. What would you say to him and Cub Scouts? You know, your journey right now.
Well, first, I think obvious, get my Eagle Scout. That's one of the biggest regrets in my life, if not the largest.
Really?
Right? Because I didn't do what I set out to do. Right? And that it haunts me. And I even talked to my son about that. I think my answer, I'll give you what I give my son. My son was a top-tier ice hockey player. In my son's experience, he only played on one team for 1 year with another black boy.
Wow.
In his total experience, which spanned 8 years, he only played in a game with no more than 20 black boys. Right? That didn't matter. Because I said to him, who are you? What are you about? What does this mean in that context? And it always meant that he followed his passion. Right? And if your passion is good, if it's worthwhile, and hopefully if your passion can be liberatory to people, right? Bring about a greater level of justice, please, by all means, pursue it.
Yeah.
And please know that you are still, in this day and age, blazing a trail that few people go down. It ain't cool to fight for other folks. It's only cool for folks who are fighting for other folks.
Yeah.
Right? You know, even still, we had a beautiful Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
It ain't cool, right? And so remember, the greatest gains are made on the road that is least traveled. And so when you find that, and if you're passionate about it, follow it.
Yeah.
And just make sure it does something good for other people. That's the only thing I ask.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I would like to say again, Dr. Sams, appreciate the time
Thank
to
you
sit
so
with us on
much.
policy and culture.
Definitely.
I feel like we definitely bobbed in and out, weaved the many intricacies
I don't know how
between
you're going to edit that.
policy and culture. It was a great conversation,
Yeah,
very educational, very insightful. Very
Absolutely.
grateful
I enjoyed
for the
it.
time, the expertise. So thank you again, Dr. Sams.
But y'all
Thank you.
keep
Thank
doing this, okay?
Absolutely.
This is
Absolutely.
so important.
Absolutely appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Blessings.
Okay.